Captain John Miller stood on the bridge of the U.S. Valiant, watching the stars. His ship was the pride of Earth's fleet. Built in the orbiting shipyards above Mars, it represented the best of human engineering. Today, it carried an important mission: humanity's first meeting with the Zolarian Empire. "Approaching the meeting coordinates, sir," said Lieutenant Diane Ross, her fingers moving across the navigation panel. Miller nodded. After 200 years of space exploration, humans had finally found intelligent life. The Zolarians had sent signals 6 months ago, and both species agreed to meet here, in neutral space. "Status report?" Miller asked. "Our escort vessels are in position," Officer Greg Howard replied. "The Zolarian ships are already waiting. 5 vessels, just as they promised." Miller straightened his uniform. He had practiced this moment countless times. First contact could shape relations between their species for centuries to come. "Open communications," he ordered. The main screen flickered to life. A blue-skinned being appeared. Its eyes were large and black, set in a face covered with what looked like small scales. This was High Admiral Krevnar, leader of the Zolarian delegation. "Greetings, High Admiral," Miller said. "I am Captain John Miller of Earth's United Space Force. We come in peace and friendship." The translator worked quickly, converting his words into the clicking language of the Zolarians. There was a pause before Krevnar responded. "Your ships are small," the alien said. "Is this all the force your people can send?" Miller frowned slightly. This wasn't the greeting he expected. "We come as diplomats, not warriors," he explained. "Our mission is peaceful exchange." The Zolarian's face showed no emotion that Miller could read. "Interesting. We will meet on your vessel in 1 hour to discuss terms." Before Miller could respond, the screen went dark. "That was strange," said Communications Officer Mary Peterson. "They seem more interested in our ships than our greeting." Miller shrugged. "Different culture, different priorities. Prepare the meeting room. Let's make sure everything is perfect." 1 hour later, Miller stood in the Valiant's conference room as 5 Zolarians entered. They wore what appeared to be military uniforms, decorated with symbols Miller didn't recognize. High Admiral Krevnar led them, walking with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Welcome aboard the Valiant," Miller said. "We hope this meeting will be the first of many between our peoples." The Zolarians took their seats without responding. Krevnar placed a device on the table that projected a map of the galaxy. "These are the terms of our arrangement," Krevnar said, pointing to several star systems. "All planets and moons with significant water bodies will come under Zolarian protection. Your species will remove any settlements from these worlds within 1 Earth year." Miller blinked in surprise. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're here to establish diplomatic relations, not surrender territory." "Surrender." Krevnar made a sound that might have been laughter. "We offer protection. The oceans of these worlds are sacred to our kind. They cannot be polluted by land dwellers." "Europa and Mars have been colonized for decades," Miller explained. "We have families there, research stations, entire communities." "That is unfortunate," Krevnar said. "But necessary sacrifices must be made for proper order." Miller stood up. "I'm afraid I can't agree to these terms. Perhaps we should step back and begin with cultural exchange before discussing territory." The High Admiral's eyes narrowed. "You refuse our generous offer." "I suggest we find terms that benefit both our peoples," Miller said carefully. Krevnar stood suddenly. "There is nothing more to discuss." He touched a device on his wrist. "Weakness must be answered with strength. This is the way of the ocean." Miller's communicator beeped urgently. "Captain, Zolarian vessels are powering weapons." Officer Howard's voice was tense. Before Miller could respond, the ship rocked violently. Alarms blared throughout the Valiant. "Direct hit on the Marathon and the Everest," Howard reported. "Both ships are. They're gone, sir." Miller looked at Krevnar in shock. "What have you done?" "Begun what was inevitable," the Zolarian said calmly. "Prepare your people. Captain. The tide of the Zolarian Empire waits for no one. The ship shook again as Miller hit the emergency alert. All hands, battle stations, get us out of here. The first war in human space history had begun without warning, and the U.S. Valiant was already running for its life. 6 months had passed since the attack. The U.S. Valiant's warning had given Earth time to prepare, but the news wasn't good. In the main war room beneath Geneva, military leaders from all Earth nations gathered around a large holographic display. Admiral Susan Carter pointed to the blinking red dots that represented lost colonies. Her face was tired, with new lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before the war started. The Zolarians have taken New Atlantis, Poseidon Base, and, as of yesterday, Trigon Colony, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand shook slightly. Their fleet is now moving toward Mars. The room filled with worried murmurs. General Frank Peters slammed his fist on the table. How are they advancing so quickly? We've sent everything we have. Admiral Carter adjusted the display. Their navy outnumbers ours 7-1. Their ships are faster in open space, and their weapons have longer range. She took a deep breath. At our current loss rate, Mars will fall within 2 weeks. Earth could be under attack in 3 months. President William Stark stood up. There must be something we can do. Our people won't surrender their homes without a fight. From the back of the room, a man cleared his throat. He was younger than most others present, with a scholar's pale complexion rather than a soldier's weathered face. Lieutenant Commander Alan Ross, sir, he said when the president looked his way. I might have an idea. Admiral Carter nodded. Commander Ross is one of our naval historians and strategists. He's been studying the Zolarian attack patterns. Ross walked to the display and touched several controls. The hologram shifted to show recordings of space battles. Look at how the Zolarians move their ships, he said. Always in perfect formation. Always following the same tactics. They attack in waves, front to back, like ocean currents. He changed the display again. Now look at historical human naval battles. The hologram showed ancient ships with sails, then modern naval vessels. Throughout history, when humans were outgunned at sea, we developed asymmetric tactics. The Greeks used narrow passages at Salamis to defeat the larger Persian fleet. The British used the weather gauge against the Spanish Armada. Even in the Pacific during World War II, we used submarines and aircraft carriers in ways nobody expected. General Peters frowned. What's your point, Commander? We're fighting in space, not on water. Ross nodded. But the Zolarians evolved in water. They think like aquatic beings, even in space. Their tactics are predictable because they're stuck in patterns from their evolutionary past. He touched the display one more time. They expect us to fight like them, to meet strength with strength. But that's not how humans became the dominant species on Earth. We survived by adaptation, by changing our tactics when outmatched. Admiral Carter studied him carefully. What exactly are you suggesting? Give me permission to form a special tactical unit, Ross said. Let me find people who can think outside conventional space warfare. The Zolarians fight like they're still underwater. Let's use that against them. President Stark looked skeptical. You want to fight a space war using old naval tactics from Earth? Not exactly, sir, Ross replied. I want to fight using human ingenuity. The Zolarians expect us to follow their rulebook. What if we don't? The room fell silent. Finally, Admiral Carter spoke. The traditional approach isn't working, she admitted, and we're running out of options. She turned to Ross. You have 1 week to assemble your team and develop a plan for the defense of Mars. Ross straightened his back. Thank you, Admiral. We won't let you down. As the meeting ended, Admiral Carter pulled Ross aside. This better work, Commander, she said quietly, because if Mars falls, we might not have a second chance. Ross watched a hologram showing the massive Zolarian fleet approaching Mars. Their ships moved in perfect, predictable patterns, like an unstoppable tide. But tides, Ross knew, could be turned by the right strategy at the right time. Lieutenant Commander Alan Ross sat in a small conference room that had been converted into his team's workspace. The walls were covered with maps, diagrams, and historical naval battle plans. 3 days had passed since the meeting, and time was running out. The door opened, and a woman in a submarine service uniform walked in. She had short brown hair and a determined expression. "Lieutenant Kate Morgan reporting." "Sir," she said, saluting. "Submarine warfare specialist." Ross nodded. "At ease, Lieutenant. Welcome to Operation Understudy." "Understudy, sir?" she asked. "Because we're learning from history script," Ross explained. "And soon we'll be taking center stage." 2 more people entered the room. A tall man with thick glasses and oil-stained hands introduced himself first. "Paul Wright, engineer. I work on weapons systems." Next to him stood a woman with curly red hair. "Dr. Linda Freeman, xenobiologist. I study how Zolarians think." Ross gestured to the chairs. "Please, sit down. We don't have much time." He activated a screen showing Zolarian ships in formation. "The enemy will reach Mars in 11 days. Our job is to find a way to stop them with the ships we have." Lieutenant Morgan frowned. "But we're outnumbered." "Yes," Ross agreed. "But being outnumbered has never stopped humans before." He walked to a wall covered with images of historical naval battles. "Look at how humans fought when outgunned on the seas. At Salamis, at Trafalgar, during the Pacific War." Engineer Wright adjusted his glasses. "Those were water battles, not space battles." "Exactly," Ross said, smiling. "And that's our advantage." Dr. Freeman leaned forward. "I think I see where you're going. Zolarians evolved underwater. Their military thinking is based on water movement." Ross nodded. "While humans evolved on land and had to adapt to the sea, we think differently." He touched a control, and a simulation appeared. It showed human ships moving in unusual patterns, breaking formation, and attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. "The Zolarians expect us to fight like them, in organized, predictable patterns. What if we don't?" Lieutenant Morgan studied the simulation. "Like submarine warfare. Hide, strike, disappear. Or like ancient Greek fire ships," Wright added, getting excited. "Small vessels packed with explosives sent into enemy fleets." Dr. Freeman tapped her fingers on the table. "The Zolarians won't expect chaos. Their society values order above all else." For the next 7 days, they worked without stopping. They studied every naval battle in human history where a smaller force had defeated a larger one. They created simulations and tested tactics. They slept little and drank too much coffee. On the final day, Ross presented their plan to Admiral Carter. She watched silently as he explained their strategy. "Operation Understudy has 3 parts," Ross said. "First, we use what we call dazzle camouflage to confuse their targeting systems. This was used on ships in World War I. He showed images of ships painted with odd, disorienting patterns. Next, we use submarine tactics. Some ships will dive into Mars' atmosphere, then rise behind enemy lines." Admiral Carter raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. "Finally, we deploy unmanned ships as fire ships, like the British used against the Spanish Armada. They'll be packed with explosives and programmed to ram Zolarian vessels." When Ross finished, Admiral Carter sat quietly for a long moment. "This is completely unorthodox," she finally said. "It goes against every space combat doctrine we've developed." Ross held his breath. "Which means," she continued, "the Zolarians won't see it coming." She stood up. "Operation Understudy is approved, Commander. Deploy to Mars immediately." As they left the meeting, Lieutenant Morgan turned to Ross. "Do you really think this will work?" Ross looked at his team. "The Zolarians have better ships and more weapons, but there's one thing they don't have." "What's that?" Wright asked. "A history of being human," Ross replied. "And that might make all the difference." The sky above Mars glowed with the lights of approaching Solarian ships. There were hundreds of them, moving in perfect formation like a school of fish. From the command center built into Olympus Mons, the largest mountain in the solar system, Commander Ross watched the enemy approach. "All ships report ready," Lieutenant Morgan said from her station. The screens around them showed Earth's defenders. Just 63 ships against the Solarian armada. Ross took a deep breath. "Begin Operation Understudy. All ships activate Dazzle protocols." On the screens, the human ships suddenly changed their appearance. Special projectors created confusing patterns of light and shadow around each vessel. Some appeared to be moving in different directions than they actually were. Others seemed to split into multiple ships or fade away entirely. "Solarian fleet is adjusting course," reported Officer Dan Kelly. "They seem confused by our formations." Ross nodded. "They expect us to form a defensive line. When their sensors can't make sense of our positions, it disrupts their entire battle plan." The first shots fired across space as the Solarians attempted to target the human fleet. Most missed, hitting empty space where their sensors falsely detected ships. "Phase 2, Ross ordered. "Diving teams, begin your descent." Lieutenant Morgan led the operation from her console. 12 human ships suddenly dropped toward Mars, plunging into the upper atmosphere. Their heat shields glowed red as they descended. "The Solarians are ignoring the diving ships," Dr. Freeman observed. "Just as we predicted. In their ocean-based thinking, a ship that sinks is no longer a threat." Ross smiled. "They'll learn differently today." On the main screen, the Solarian fleet continued its advance, focusing on the remaining human ships that danced in confusing patterns before them. Then, without warning, the 12 diving ships burst up from behind the Solarian formation, emerging from Mars' atmosphere with engines at full power. "Attack pattern Triton," Morgan commanded. The 12 ships opened fire on the rear of the Solarian fleet, targeting their engines and communication arrays. The Solarians, caught by surprise, scrambled to respond to the attack from an unexpected direction. "They're breaking formation," Wright reported excitedly. "Their command structure is confused." Ross watched as the perfect Solarian formation began to fall apart. Some ships turned to face the rear attack, while others continued forward, creating gaps in their lines. "Now, Mr. Wright," Ross said, "launch the fire ships." Engineer Wright activated his console. From hidden positions around Mars, 20 unmanned vessels suddenly powered up. They were little more than engines, fuel tanks, and explosives wrapped in stealth materials. "Fire ships away," Wright confirmed, all running silent on approach vectors. On the screens, the small fire ships slipped through the broken Solarian formation, their minimal profiles making them nearly invisible among the chaos of battle. They targeted the largest enemy vessels, gradually accelerating to maximum speed. The first fire ship struck a Solarian command vessel. The explosion tore through its side, sending debris spinning through space. Then another hit and another. Across the battlefield, the unmanned bombs found their targets. "Solarian fleet is in disarray," Morgan reported. "They're trying to rebuild their formation, but can't coordinate quickly enough." Ross leaned forward. "All ships converge in attack. Target their command vessels." The human fleet, both the decoys from the front and the ambushers from behind, moved in for the kill. Their weapons focused on the weak points Dr. Freeman had identified in Solarian ship design. 3 hours later, it was over. The Martian sky was filled with debris and the retreating engines of Solarian ships. Of Earth's 63 vessels, 22 had been destroyed. But they had won. Mars remained free. In the command center, Admiral Carter's face appeared on the main screen. She looked both shocked and impressed. "Congratulations, Commander Ross," she said. "Your unconventional tactics have given us our first victory." Ross looked at his tired team. "Thank you, Admiral. But this is just the beginning." "Indeed," Carter replied. "Because now, for the first time since this war began, We're going on the offensive. 1 month after the Battle of Olympus Mons, Commander Alan Ross stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiant, Earth's newest warship. His victory had earned him a promotion and command of the counteroffensive. Admiral Carter's face filled the main screen before him. "The President has approved Operation Trident," she said. "Your mission is to retake Europa and establish a forward base for further operations." Ross nodded. "Thank you, Admiral. We won't let you down." When the screen went dark, Ross turned to his team. Lieutenant Morgan, Engineer Wright, and Dr. Freeman had all transferred to his command. They were joined by the Defiant's captain, Steve Anderson, a veteran officer who had fought in the first battles of the war. "The Zolarians still outnumber us," Ross said, "but they've pulled back to reorganize after Mars. That gives us a window of opportunity." He activated the holographic display at the center of the bridge. It showed Jupiter and its moons, with Europa highlighted. "Europa is key," Ross explained. "Its subsurface ocean gives us a tactical advantage the Zolarians won't expect." Engineer Wright stepped forward. He had spent the past month developing new weapons. "I've adapted our space mines based on old naval designs," he said, showing small round devices on the display. "They can be deployed in corridors to channel enemy movement." Lieutenant Morgan pointed to specific areas around Europa. "We'll use distributed lethality tactics," she said, "spreading our combat power across many smaller vessels rather than concentrating it in a few large ones. The Zolarians won't know which ships to target first." Dr. Freeman had been studying Zolarian communications intercepted after the Mars battle. "Their commanders are frustrated," she reported. "They consider our tactics primitive and dishonorable. They can't understand why they're not working against us." Ross smiled. "Good. Let them underestimate us." 3 days later, the human fleet approached Europa. 30 ships, all that Earth could spare, against the 50 Zolarian vessels occupying the Moon. The U.S. Defiant led the formation. "Begin mine deployment," Ross ordered. Hundreds of small disc-shaped devices spread out, creating invisible barriers in space. On the tactical display, they formed a funnel shape leading toward the human fleet. "Zolarian ships are moving to intercept," Captain Anderson reported. "Let them come," Ross said calmly. "Lieutenant Morgan, prepare your teams." As the Zolarian ships approached, they encountered the minefield. Several vessels triggered explosions, creating confusion in their ranks. But instead of stopping, they pushed forward, confident in their superior numbers. "They're taking the bait," Morgan said, "moving right into our funnel." Ross nodded. "Now, Captain Anderson, take us under." The U.S. Defiant and 5 escort ships suddenly dove toward Europa's surface. Unlike Mars, Europa was covered in ice with an ocean below. Using a technique developed by Morgan, the ships used precise laser drills to cut through the ice at calculated points. "Ice breached," Anderson reported. "Submersion in 3, 2, 1." The ships disappeared beneath Europa's surface, entering the vast ocean that lay hidden under the ice. The Zolarians, seeing what appeared to be a retreat, pressed their attack on the remaining human vessels. "They think we're running," Dr. Freeman said, watching the Zolarian movements on the display. "Let them think that," Ross replied. "Mr. Wright, status of the sonic disruptors." "Ready, Commander." While the battle raged above, the Defiant and its escorts moved through Europa's ocean. When they reached specific points beneath the Zolarian fleet, Wright activated the new weapons. Powerful sonic waves shot upward, vibrating through the ice and into space. The effect on the Zolarian ships was immediate. Their hulls, designed with the same principles as undersea creatures on their homeworld, resonated with the sonic waves. Systems failed, and crews were incapacitated. "All ships, surface and attack," Ross ordered. The Defiant and its escorts burst back through the ice at different points, directly beneath the disabled Zolarian vessels. Their weapons fired at point-blank range. By the time High Admiral Krev Nar realized what had happened, Europa was no longer under Zolarian control. The victory at Europa sent shockwaves through the Zolarian Empire. For the first time, they faced an enemy who not only resisted but pushed back. High Admiral Krev Nar called all his forces to gather at Alpha Centauri, the most distant human colony. There, he would crush the human fleet once and for all. On the U.S. Defiant, Commander Ross received the intelligence report with a smile. Everything was going according to plan. They're gathering their entire Central Imperial fleet, he told his officers. Over 200 ships. Captain Anderson frowned. Even with our recent victories, we can't match those numbers. We don't need to match them, Ross replied. We just need them to think we're trying to. 2 weeks later, the human fleet arrived at Alpha Centauri. 75 ships, every combat vessel Earth could spare. They faced a Zolarian armada nearly 3 times their size. All ships in position, Lieutenant Morgan reported. Operation Trafalgar is ready. Ross nodded. The plan was named after one of history's most famous naval battles, where a smaller force defeated a larger one through unconventional tactics. Begin Phase 1, he ordered. Fall back from the colony. The human fleet started to retreat from Alpha Centauri, moving slowly as if trying to escape the Zolarian force. They're following, Dr. Freeman said, watching the enemy ships on the tactical display. Just as we predicted. Their pride won't let them ignore a retreating enemy. The Zolarian fleet pursued, stretching out in a long formation as they chased what they thought was a fleeing opponent. High Admiral Krevnar's flagship led the charge, eager for a decisive victory. They're fully committed to the pursuit, Morgan said. Ready for Phase 2. Ross keyed his communicator. All ships, execute Trafalgar maneuver. The human fleet suddenly stopped retreating. Instead, they formed 3 lines perpendicular to the approaching Zolarian formation. It looked like a suicidal move, exposing the human ships to the full force of the enemy. Zolarians are adjusting to envelop our lines, Anderson reported. Hold position, Ross said calmly. As the Zolarian fleet moved to surround the human ships, something changed. The empty space around them suddenly flickered, and 30 additional human vessels appeared from nowhere. Stealth ships decloaking, Wright announced proudly. The engineer had adapted the Dazzle camouflage technology into a full stealth system. The ships had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for this moment. Now, Mr. Wright, Ross said, deploy the ironclads. Wright activated his console. The newly revealed ships suddenly accelerated toward the Zolarian fleet. They were different from standard vessels, heavily armored at the front with reinforced hulls. Ironclad technology was a game-changer in naval warfare during the American Civil War, Ross explained as they watched. Ships that could withstand enemy fire and ram their opponents. The armored human ships slammed into the Zolarian vessels at high speed. Their reinforced hulls tore through the alien defenses that were designed to stop energy weapons, not physical impacts. Meanwhile, the 3 lines of human ships opened fire, cutting through the now chaotic Zolarian formation. Their carefully organized patterns fell apart as ships tried to avoid the ramming attacks. High Admiral's flagship is isolated, Morgan reported. The Zolarian command structure is breaking down. Ross watched as the once mighty Zolarian fleet scattered. Some ships continued fighting, but many retreated, unable to coordinate without clear leadership. Target the flagship, Ross ordered. All available ships. The Defiant led a group of vessels toward Krevnar's command ship. Their weapons focused on a single point, overwhelming its defenses. The Zolarian flagship turned to escape, but it was too late. A final barrage from the Defiant left it drifting, powerless, in space. Hours later, the battle was over. The human fleet had suffered losses, but the Zolarian Central Imperial Fleet was devastated. More than half their ships were destroyed or captured, and the rest had fled. On the bridge of the Defiant, the crew cheered their victory, but Ross remained quiet, studying the tactical display. "Commander," Anderson asked, "is something wrong?" "No," Ross replied. "But this isn't the end. This is where things get interesting." "How so?" Ross looked up. Because now, Captain, they'll have to talk to us. The peace talks were held on a neutral space station orbiting between Earth and Solarian space. Captain John Miller, the man who had survived first contact, was now Admiral Miller. He led the human delegation, his face showing the wear of 2 years of war. Across the table sat not High Admiral Krevnar, but a new Zolarian leader. Merlac was younger, with lighter blue skin and less rigid posture. The defeat at Alpha Centauri had led to changes in the Zolarian leadership. "We extend greetings to the human delegation," Merlac said through translators. "We come to discuss terms of mutual respect." Miller nodded. "The United Earth welcomes this opportunity for peace. Too much blood has been spilled already." Behind Miller stood Commander Ross, now a decorated hero of the war. He watched the Zolarians carefully, noting their changed behavior. Dr. Freeman had prepared him for this meeting, explaining that Zolarian culture placed great importance on understanding defeat. "Before we discuss terms," Merlac said, "we wish to understand something." The Zolarian leaned forward. "How did you defeat us?" "Our ships were superior, our numbers greater, our tactics perfected over 10,000 years of naval tradition." Miller looked at Ross, who stepped forward. "That was precisely why we won," Ross explained. "Your naval traditions made you predictable." He activated a holographic display showing Earth's oceans. "Humans evolved on land. We had to learn to master the sea. This forced us to think differently, to adapt constantly." The display shifted to show historical battles, small Greek ships defeating Persian galleys, English sailors using wind against the Spanish Armada, submarine warfare in Earth's world wars. Each time humans faced a superior naval force, we invented new ways to fight, Ross continued. We never had the luxury of fighting only one way. Merlac studied the images with large, blinking eyes. "And our tactics were perfect," Ross said, "for underwater combat on your homeworld. But space isn't water, even though many of the principles seem similar. Your formations were beautiful, but rigid. When we disrupted them, you couldn't adapt quickly enough." The Zolarian delegation whispered among themselves. Finally, Merlac spoke again. "We believed your species was weak in naval strategy. We were wrong." The Zolarian made a gesture that their translator explained was a sign of respect. "It seems humans are simply unstoppable when challenged." Admiral Miller smiled slightly. "Not unstoppable, just adaptable. Now shall we discuss peace?" The negotiations lasted 3 days. In the end, both sides agreed to respect territorial boundaries. The Zolarians would withdraw from all human colonies, and humans would share their tactical knowledge with the Zolarian Empire. As the final documents were signed, Merlac approached Ross privately. "Your victory has changed our empire," the Zolarian leader said. "For thousands of years, we believed our way was the only way. Now we must learn to adapt as humans do." Ross nodded. "It wasn't easy for us either. We had to look to our past to find our future." "An interesting concept," Merlac replied. "Would your people accept Solarian officers as students in your naval academies? We wish to learn this human way of thinking." "I believe that could be arranged," Ross said. "War makes enemies, but peace can make allies." Later, as the human delegation prepared to return to Earth, Admiral Miller found Ross looking out a viewport at the stars. "Thinking about the war?" Miller asked. "Thinking about the peace," Ross replied. "The Zolarians aren't so different from us. They just forgot how to change." Miller placed a hand on the younger officer's shoulder. "You know, when I first met them, I thought we could be friends. Maybe now we can." Ross smiled. "Maybe, but we should remember this lesson. It wasn't our ships or our weapons that won this war. It was our history. All those centuries of humans adapting, learning, and overcoming challenges. A good lesson to remember," Miller agreed, "especially for a species that's just beginning to explore the stars." As their ship departed for Earth, Ross took one last look at the Zolarian vessels. Their formation was different now, less rigid, more fluid. They were already learning. And so were humans. 1 year after the peace treaty, Commander Alan Ross stood at a podium in the main hall of Earth's Naval Academy. The room was filled with students, officers, and distinguished guests. Among them sat Admiral Carter, Captain Anderson, and Ross's former team members. Today, I present my thesis on the anthropological advantage in space combat. Ross began. Behind him, screens displayed his research. The war with the Zolarian Empire taught us an important lesson. Our greatest strength wasn't our technology or weapons. It was our adaptability, the result of our unique evolutionary path. Ross clicked to a new image showing Earth's diverse environments. Humans evolved on land, but learned to master the seas. This dual perspective made us approach naval warfare differently than the Zolarians, who evolved in ocean environments. In the front row, 6 Solarian officers listened carefully. They were the first exchange students under the new peace agreement, sent to learn human tactics and perspectives. The Zolarians had perfected one way of fighting, Ross continued. But when that way failed, they struggled to adapt. Humans, throughout our history, have been forced to innovate constantly. Later that day, Ross walked through the academy grounds with Kelvor, one of the Zolarian exchange officers. "Your thesis makes me reconsider our entire military doctrine," Kelvor said. "For generations, we believed our naval strategy was perfect." Ross nodded. "That was your weakness. Perfection means no room for growth." They stopped at a training field where human and Zolarian cadets practiced together. The Zolarians moved with natural grace, teaching humans about underwater movement techniques. The humans showed the Zolarians how to think unpredictably. "Look at them," Ross said, "learning from each other's strengths." "Yes," Kelvor agreed. "This is something our people rarely did before. We saw other species as either threats or irrelevant." "That's changing now," Ross said. They continued walking until they reached the newly built Interstellar Naval Research Institute. Admiral Carter had established it after the war as a place where species could share tactical knowledge. Inside, Dr. Freeman was working with Zolarian scientists to understand how different evolutionary paths affected military thinking. Engineer Wright collaborated with Zolarian engineers, combining human creativity with Zolarian precision to develop new technologies. "Admiral Miller sends his regards," Kelvor said as they toured the facility. "He is working with our historians to document the war from both perspectives." Ross smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. History should remember both sides of any conflict." That evening, Ross attended a formal dinner celebrating the first year of peace. Admiral Carter presented him with a promotion to captain and command of a new exploration vessel. "The U.S. Discovery will be our first joint mission," Carter announced. "Half the crew will be human, half Solarian. Their mission, to explore and establish peaceful contact with new civilizations." After the ceremony, an older Zolarian approached Ross. He wore the elaborate uniform of a high-ranking historian. "Captain Ross," the Zolarian said, bowing slightly. "I am Jorvek, Chief Historian of the Imperial Academy. I studied your tactics extensively." Ross returned the gesture. "An honor to meet you." "I have come to a conclusion that my superiors have finally accepted," Jorvek said. "We thought your naval strategy was weak because it did not follow our patterns. But we were wrong. Humans are not weak. They are simply unstoppable when challenged." Ross shook his head. "Not unstoppable. Just different. We learned to adapt because we had to. Now we can teach each other." Jorvek nodded. "Indeed. Perhaps the greatest victory of this war was not won in battle, but here, in peace. Two species learning that different perspectives make both stronger." As the celebration continued around them, Ross looked out at the stars visible through the large windows. Somewhere out there, other civilizations waited. Some might be friendly, others hostile. But humans would be ready, carrying the lessons of history with them. And now, they wouldn't face the universe alone. Former enemies had become allies, their different perspectives creating something stronger than either could achieve alone. not unstoppable, perhaps, but together, certainly more adaptable. And in the vastness of space, adaptability might prove to be the greatest strength of all.